The sea was quiet that morning. Sunlight filtered through its surface in long golden lines, weaving between slow-moving currents and drifting sand. Far below, where the water grew soft and green, the city of Bikini Bottom lay half-wrapped in silence, a world balanced between waking and dream. At the edge of town, in a hollow of coral and thyme, stood a small dome-shaped house that had once been a fortress. Its walls, once bright and proud, were now softened by the sea's patient hand. Their color faded to the pale gray of seashells, worn smooth by tide and years. Inside, where quiet hummed like the heartbeat of the ocean itself, an old cape hung upon the wall. Its fabric had lost its weight, its shimmer dulled, yet it carried a kind of still light, the memory of motion. Mermaid Man awoke slowly, his eyes adjusting to the soft green glow that filled the room. The sea outside shifted gently, casting ripples of light across the ceiling. He breathed in, the sound low and steady, like the sea drawing itself over sand. Nearby, in a smaller chair carved from driftwood, Barnacle Boy rested still, head bowed, his hat tilted forward. They had fallen asleep there, as they often did, not from weariness alone, but from the simple rhythm of quiet living. The days of alarms and patrols had passed. The ocean no longer called for battle cries or urgent rescues. The creatures of the deep lived in a calm balance now, and the heroes who had once defended them had become keepers of stories instead. Mermaid Man stood, slowly, his movements measured. The cape brushed softly against his hand as he passed, its fabric whispering faintly. He lifted it once, as he had done so many times before, not to wear, but to feel its weight, the echo of what had once been strength and speed, now transformed into remembrance. The sea outside their window shimmered brighter, alive with morning. Tiny bubbles drifted upward like scattered pearls. Schools of fish passed in coordinated silence, their bodies flashing with silver light. Beyond them, the coral reefs swayed in unison, breathing. Barnacle Boy stirred. His eyes opened halfway, catching the same light. For a moment, he looked toward his old friend, then toward the sea. The silence between them was not emptiness, but understanding. The quiet that comes when words have long since done their work. Mermaid Man stepped outside, into the slow current. The world beyond the dome was alive, but unhurried. The sand shifted beneath his feet, soft and fine. The ocean floor stretched wide and calm, dotted with shells and drifting strands of seaweed that glowed faintly in the filtered sun. He looked upward, where beams of gold cut through blue, and for an instant he remembered the rush of water past his face, the weightlessness of movement, the feeling of endless possibility. Now, that same motion lived in smaller gestures, the ripple of current against his hand, the soft bend of coral beneath the tide. Strength, he thought, had not left. It had simply changed form. He walked slowly through the garden of sea anemones they had planted years ago. The creatures moved gently with the water, each one catching bits of drifting light. Between them, small fish darted, new generations that did not know of the old battles, the rescues, the missions that had filled the sea with echoes of heroism. Barnacle Boy joined him a moment later, his steps quiet but sure. Together they stood among the coral, watching the water move. The current brushed past them, carrying warmth from the shallows. In the distance, the faint hum of the city drifted through the water, a murmur of daily life, of laughter, of continuity. They began to walk, not toward any goal, but simply to move. The seafloor stretched wide before them, familiar yet always new. With each step, the soft sand rose in faint spirals that dissolved as quickly as they formed. As they moved, memories drifted with the tide, not as visions, but as sensations. The weight of armor, the rush of pursuit, the shimmer of light on the surface before a leap, the sound of laughter after victory. All of it now returned not as longing, but as warmth, carried gently by the currents of time. They passed beneath arches of coral shaped like great cathedrals. The light within them shifted constantly, reflecting from fish scales and shells. Barnacle Boy paused at one point, running his hand along the stone. Beneath his fingers, he felt grooves worn smooth by years of water and touch, the slow artistry of nature, creating beauty through persistence. Above them, a ray glided past, wings extended like a shadow of grace. Its movement stirred the water into spirals that brushed gently over them. Mermaid Man looked up, eyes calm, and followed its motion until it disappeared into the light. They reached a ridge overlooking the outer reef, a place they had once called the Lookout. From here, the ocean stretched open and vast, its color deepening into blue so pure it seemed infinite. The current here was stronger, but they stood easily against it, the strength of old days still present in the body, quiet but steady. Below, they could see the remnants of what had once been their base of operations, the great shell-like structure, now half covered in coral, inhabited by small sea creatures who darted through the windows as if through the rooms of an old legend. The sight brought no sadness, only peace. The sea had reclaimed what was always hers, reshaping it into something alive again. They stood for a long time without speaking. The water moved around them, carrying the soft song of the deep. Every sound seemed both near and distant, part of a single vast rhythm. When at last they turned to go, the current guided them gently back toward home. Along the way, they passed clusters of sea lilies blooming in the sand, their tendrils swaying like delicate threads of music. The light above dimmed slightly as the day advanced, the beams narrowing, deepening in color. Inside their home once more, the world was warm with soft glow. The cape still hung upon the wall, but now it seemed brighter, as if it had caught some of the morning light and held it close. Barnacle Boy settled back into his chair, his movements slow but sure. Mermaid Man stood by the window again, watching as the last of the day's brightness faded into soft green dusk. Outside, the ocean pulsed gently, alive with its own slow music. The coral shimmered faintly, fish moved in silver arcs, and bubbles rose like tiny lanterns toward the surface. In that moment, the two old heroes understood something deeper than memory. The sea did not forget. Every motion they had ever made, every rescue, every promise, every shared laugh, had become part of it. The current carried their stories as it carried sand and light, reshaping them endlessly, passing them along to each new wave. The cape upon the wall swayed slightly, though no current touched it. It was as if the sea itself had breathed through the walls of their home. Mermaid Man closed his eyes. The world outside slowed further, until sound became silence, and silence became peace. The water pressed gently against the dome, a heartbeat surrounding them. In the calm that followed, the two heroes sat quietly, letting the day dissolve into stillness. The sea had no need of saving tonight. It needed only to be listened to be witnessed in its unending rhythm, its quiet strength, its patient life. And so they listened, as they had once fought, with all the devotion the sea had taught them. When the last of the light faded, and the ocean turned to blue shadow, they rested where they were, two figures in the soft glow of a world that moved eternally around them. The cape upon the wall glimmered faintly, like a single star seen through water, a reminder that heroism, like the sea, never truly ends. It only changes its shape, becoming gentler, deeper, and endlessly alive. The ocean has its own kind of dawn, not marked by the breaking of light, but by the turning of color. When the first blue of morning rises through the water, the deep stirs in silence. The creatures hidden within crevices and under coral stretch and drift from shadow. The sand glows faintly. The world exhales. That morning, far beyond the quiet edge of Bikini Bottom, the abyssal beacon stirred. Once, it had been the heart of the underwater defense network, a tower of coral and crystal that pulsed with the light of vigilance. Now, it slept in near darkness, its surface covered with soft moss and the quiet shimmer of age. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy had not seen it in years. Yet, as the morning deepened, a faint pulse began to travel through the currents, a low rhythm, like the slow beat of a distant drum. It was not an alarm, nor a cry for help, but something older, the sound of memory awakening. In their dome, the two heroes sat at their small table, sharing the kind of silence that only long companionship allows. The water beyond the window shimmered faintly, disturbed by unseen motion. Mermaid Man looked toward it, his expression neither alarmed nor curious, simply listening. The sound came again, deep, slow, patient, the voice of something returning. He rose without haste. Barnacle Boy followed, adjusting his gloves with a quiet precision born of habit. They stepped outside together, into the cool expanse of early light. The current brushed past them like the turning of pages, and far in the distance, the faint glow of the beacon appeared, a thread of silver cutting through green-blue water. They swam slowly, each movement deliberate, balanced. The years had taken their swiftness but replaced it with something steadier, a rhythm in tune with the sea itself. Around them, fish moved in flocks, small and bright, parting gently to let them through. As they drew nearer, the water thickened with stillness. The beacon stood half buried in coral, its once gleaming surface softened into organic patterns. Its light flickered faintly, like breath passing through the deep. It was beautiful in its decay, a monument reclaimed by the ocean. They hovered before it, the current swirling around their legs. Mermaid Man extended a hand, touching the coral that had grown over the control ring. The contact sent a soft tremor through the structure, awakening a faint hum that resonated through the water. The sound was low and slow, and yet it carried meaning, not in words, but in memory. It spoke of tides once patrolled, of missions completed, of dangers long past. It was the sea remembering them, replaying the pattern of their lives in the way only the ocean could, as vibration, as song. Barnacle Boy closed his eyes and let the sound move through him. It was not loud, not urgent, but deep. A voice without mouth or message, just presence. Around them, small creatures emerged from the coral, drawn to the pulse. Tiny jellyfish drifted upward, glowing in rhythm with the beacon's heartbeat. Time dissolved there. Minutes or hours, it was impossible to tell. The light from above shifted, bending in slow ribbons through the water. The beacon pulsed again, brighter this time, and the old emblem carved at its base appeared for an instant, the symbol they had once worn proudly across their chests. Mermaid Man traced it with his hand. The metal beneath the coral felt cold and smooth. When he drew back, the water shimmered slightly, as though acknowledging the touch. The beacon's hum began to fade, settling into a quiet vibration that blended with the ocean's natural rhythm. The jellyfish dispersed, their faint lights trailing like stars across the deep. The two heroes remained there, still as stone, watching the structure's light dim once more into peace. It did not die. It simply rested, its memory fulfilled. They turned slowly, beginning the swim back toward home. The water had grown warmer, filled with brightness of midday. Schools of fish followed them for a short distance before darting away into the coral. The sound of the beacon lingered faintly, not as echo but as feeling, the kind that lives behind the ribs, where the heart meets the sea. As they approached the outskirts of Bikini Bottom, the city was alive again. Bubbles rose in columns from the chimneys, lights blinked in windows, and the faint hum of traffic along the sand-filled roads reached their ears. Yet all of it felt softer now, as if the visit to the beacon had tuned the world into a lower, more peaceful frequency. Back inside the dome, the light from above played across the ceiling in slow motion. Barnacle Boy settled once more into his chair. Mermaid Man placed a shell upon the table, a fragment of coral that had come loose from the beacon's base. It glowed faintly, with residual energy, the kind that could only come from something ancient remembering itself. For a while, they simply watched it, the light pulsing in gentle rhythm, syncing almost imperceptibly with their breathing. The sound of the sea outside filled the silence like music too slow to hear. The beacon's memory had reminded them of something beyond their own story, that heroism was not confined to action. It was a kind of listening, a willingness to respond when the deep itself stirred. Even now, when their capes hung still, the ocean had called them, not for battle, but for witness. The light within the shell slowly faded, until it matched the dim glow of the room. The two friends closed their eyes. The water pressed gently against the walls of their home, the steady weight of a world both vast and familiar. In the quiet that followed, the rhythm of the beacon seemed to continue somewhere far below, deep in the unseen layers of the sea. It was not a sound anymore, but a pattern, a slow pulse that joined with the current, becoming part of the eternal heartbeat of the ocean. And somewhere in that heartbeat, too, names were carried, not shouted, not carved, but remembered. Mermaid Man, Barnacle Boy, not as saviors or symbols, but as part of the living sea, the current that moves without end, the light that flickers gently beneath the waves, the story that continues even in stillness. The beacon slept again, content. The ocean turned softly, unhurried, its depths echoing with the faint, unending hum of remembrance. The ocean holds its memories in motion. Every current that drifts across the seabed carries traces of the past, tiny fragments of sand, whispers of sound, forgotten names softened by the rhythm of time. To those who listen, the sea speaks in its own language, of flow and stillness, of weight and release. Far from the bustle of Bikini Bottom, beyond the coral canyons and glowing kelp forests, there was a region where the water moved differently. It flowed in slow spirals, like the inward turn of thought. This place, once known as the Corridor of Heroes, had been a gathering ground for those who swore to protect the sea. Time, however, had wrapped it in silence. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy drifted there now, drawn not by duty but by memory. The faint hum of the abyssal beacon had faded days ago, yet its echo lingered in the mind, like a ripple that refused to vanish. The two heroes followed that inner pull, guided by instinct more than intention. The journey was quiet. The deeper they swam, the cooler the water became, carrying the scent of silt and iron. Light filtered down from above in narrow bands, illuminating the occasional shell or glint of lost metal. Once, these waters had been filled with voices, laughter, and the steady rhythm of training, an entire generation of protectors moving as one beneath the waves. Now, there was only the low murmur of the sea and the steady pulse of their own breathing. They reached the entrance to the corridor at last. A great ring of stone half buried in sand, carvings still lined its surface, faint but legible. Symbols of tides, stars, and the open hand that had once marked the League's oath. The stone was cool beneath Mermaid Man's palm, alive with the slow thrum of the deep. They entered. Inside, the world widened into stillness. The space was immense, an open hall of coral columns and arches, sculpted long ago by both human craft and natural growth. Shafts of light fell through the cracks in the ceiling, drifting like suspended dust. In those beams, schools of tiny fish moved as if choreographed by memory itself. All around them stood the remnants of what had been, a mural half consumed by sea moss, depicting the League in their youth, fragments of armor resting quietly on pedestals, old communication shells lying open, their circuits silent. Barnacle Boy paused before one of the murals. He brushed the moss aside gently, revealing the faint outline of faces half remembered. The electric eel, the siren of the shoals, the coral crusader. Names that had once been spoken with reverence now floated, like ghost currents through the mind. Mermaid Man stood beside him, watching. For a long moment neither moved. Then, slowly, he knelt, pressing a hand to the floor. The stone was cool, but not dead. It vibrated faintly with the water's pulse. The corridor still breathed, faintly alive beneath its veil of quiet. A small current passed through then, brushing against their legs, carrying with it a trail of bioluminescent particles that spiraled upward like drifting stars. The sea was remembering, even here. They followed the current deeper into the hall, past long corridors where coral had woven itself into walls and ceilings. The silence was not empty, it was full of listening. Every movement, every touch, echoed softly, blending into the steady song of the deep. At the far end of the chamber, a shape stood partly hidden by shadow, a statue carved from black coral, its surface polished smooth by time. It depicted no single hero, but rather the sea itself, vast arms of wave and light curving around a hollow center, where the water flowed freely through. They stood before it, motionless. It was said that long ago, when the League first gathered, the statue had glowed faintly whenever the ocean itself called for help. Its heart had pulsed with a deep, low rhythm that connected to every corner of the sea. Now it was still, though the faint flow through its center still stirred, slow and constant. Mermaid Man reached out, his fingers brushing the cool coral. The current responded, shifting gently, circling once around them before fading again into the dark. They did not speak. They did not need to. The sea was speaking through every motion, through every vibration against the skin. The message was clear and wordless. That memory was not gone. It had simply taken on the shape of water. They lingered there for a while. The current around them grew softer, slower, as though cradling them within the hall's ancient embrace. Small sea creatures emerged from cracks in the coral, tiny crabs, translucent shrimp, a cloud of plankton that shimmered like starlight. Life had returned here quietly, filling the spaces that once rang with purpose. Barnacle Boy found an old plaque, half buried in silt. The words upon it were worn but legible. Strength is not in might, but in the stillness that endures. He brushed the sand away completely and let the phrase settle in the low water between them. It seemed to hum faintly in answer to the statue's slow flow. The heroes turned to leave as the light from above dimmed further. The journey back was unhurried, the kind of motion that happens without effort. The water around them seemed brighter now, as though the corridor had shared some of its long-held light. When at last they returned to the outskirts of Bikini Bottom, the familiar rhythm of the city's life welcomed them. Soft lights glowing in homes, drifting trails of bubbles rising from chimneys, the distant hum of the reef train passing through the sand. It all seemed smaller now, quieter, yet infinitely alive. Inside their home, the cape still hung where it always had. But something in the air had changed. The silence carried depth, a resonance like the aftersound of a struck bell. The journey had left an imprint, not just on memory, but on the very rhythm of the water around them. Mermaid Man set a small piece of coral upon the shelf, a fragment he had found near the statue. It glowed faintly, not with power, but with the subtle luminescence of life that has endured darkness. Barnacle Boy watched as it settled beside the shell from the beacon. The two glows merged slowly, pulsing in harmony. Outside, the current shifted. The sea was moving again, carrying with it stories too vast for words, blending past and present into one endless tide. The corridor of heroes faded behind them into the blue, but its light remained, woven now into the current, into their home, into the quiet that surrounded them. In that stillness, the heroes rested. They were no longer the saviors of the sea, but part of its continuous dream, guardians not of danger, but of memory. And as night fell across the ocean floor, the water hummed faintly with the truth the corridor had whispered, that every act, every life, every ripple remains. Nothing is lost in the sea. It only changes shape, waiting to be found again by those who listen. The sea knows how to hold twilight longer than the sky. Light lingers differently beneath the waves, folding through currents, refracting against coral. softening every color into tones of memory. The day does not end here. It drifts. It was in such a drifting hour that Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy found themselves near the edge of the old coral citadel, the place that had once stood as the crown of their underwater realm. The citadel was no longer what it had been. Once a tower of brilliance and order, it had settled over time into a living monument. Its walls now part coral reef, part ruin, part dream. The sea had claimed it, softened it, made it beautiful in its silence. They approached slowly through a garden of soft anemones. The current carried them upward along a slope of sand and shell, where the shadows of the citadel stretched like long ribbons through the dimming light. Fish moved in slow patterns above, like constellations seen through water. The citadel had been the heart of their league, the gathering place of heroes, the shelter of oaths. From here, countless calls had once echoed into the sea, rallies, signals, cries for aid, and from here they had answered. Now, only the echo remained, embedded in the coral itself, a faint vibration in the bones of the structure. As they entered through a broken archway, the sound of the outer ocean faded into a hush. Inside, the water was still and heavy, filled with floating dust that caught what little light remained. The walls rose around them in great curves, each one covered with coral that shimmered faintly with bioluminescent life. It was like stepping into a cathedral built of memory and tide. Barnacle Boy moved first, his hand brushing the coral that had once been marble. Beneath his touch, tiny creatures stirred, retreating into the safety of their homes. He smiled faintly and let his hand fall. Nothing here belonged to them anymore, and that truth felt right. They passed through a great hall, where broken fragments of armor lay half buried in silt. The insignia upon each chestplate was worn beyond reading, but the outlines were familiar. The spiral of the tide emblem, the wings of the ocean ray, the crest of the siren's guard. These were remnants of those who had come before, or perhaps of themselves in younger years. It was hard to tell. Time beneath the sea did not move in straight lines. The citadel opened into a vast chamber at its center. Here, a great coral pillar rose from floor to ceiling, glowing faintly from within. Around it were carved rings, once platforms where heroes had stood in assembly. Now they were overgrown with sea moss, their edges soft and round. Mermaid Man swam to the pillar and placed a hand upon it. The coral was warm, alive. Through it, he felt the slow pulse of the reef's heart, a rhythm that had replaced the sound of command with the sound of continuity. Life had taken the place of legacy. The ocean had rewritten the story in its own language. The two old heroes moved to one of the rings and settled there, the current circling gently around them. The light from the coral touched their faces with hues of rose and gold, the colors of a sunset translated into underwater glow. For a long while, they sat without thought, simply letting the stillness fill them. The citadel hummed faintly, a low sound that was less noise than vibration, a tone so deep it seemed to blend with the body. It was not calling for anything. It was simply alive. Outside the chamber, through the broken dome above, the sea darkened gradually. Rays of fading light cut through the water, fracturing into shifting patterns across the coral. Each pattern lasted only a moment before another replaced it. The world was painting itself, stroke by stroke, on the canvas of its own silence. Barnacle Boy turned slightly toward his companion. The light caught the edge of his mask, tracing the lines of time upon it. He looked, not at the citadel, but beyond it, into the distance where the sea deepened into shadow. There was a quiet understanding in that gaze, the acceptance that every fortress, every name, every tale must eventually sink into the rhythm of the ocean it sought to protect. Mermaid Man followed his gaze and nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Together they watched as a school of jellyfish passed overhead, their translucent bodies glowing with the last color of day. Each pulse of their movement sent ripples through the water, soft waves of light that danced across the walls of the citadel. The ocean outside had turned indigo now. The deep was beginning to hum in its nocturnal way, a language of low currents and distant vibrations. Somewhere beyond, the whales were singing, their voices long and resonant, carrying for miles through the unseen dark. The heroes remained where they were, breathing in rhythm with that ancient song. Their own bodies felt lighter, their minds quiet. It was as if the citadel itself were breathing. With them, exhaling its centuries of memory, inhaling the calm of the present. Eventually, the coral's inner glow dimmed, replaced by the soft bioluminescence of smaller creatures that emerged with night. The chamber became a constellation of living lights. Tiny shrimp flickered across the floor. Sea fans waved gently from their crevices. The water grew cool, and silence settled more deeply than before. When they finally rose to leave, the current moved with them, slow and kind. The way back was through long corridors, where the light thinned until only the faint shimmer of their path remained. Behind them, the citadel glowed faintly, its shape dissolving into the soft blue-black of the ocean. Outside once more, the sea was wide and dark. The stars above the surface cast pale reflections that drifted down through the layers of water like snow. The current pressed lightly against them, guiding them homeward. They moved without effort, carried as much as swimming, until the familiar outline of their dome appeared in the distance, a single warm light in the vastness of the sea. Inside, the glow of the coral fragment from the corridor and the shell from the beacon shimmered side by side. The light between them had grown stronger, their rhythms syncing perfectly. The two heroes settled into their chairs. The current outside brushed against the walls of the dome in long, even strokes. They breathed together, the sound barely more than a ripple. The citadel, the corridor, the beacon, all of it seemed to converge in that quiet space, not as past or memory, but as a single present moment. The ocean did not divide time. It carried everything at once. As they drifted toward rest, the sea continued its endless motion outside, currents moving through ruins, through coral, through the living and the forgotten alike. The citadel's glow pulsed once more in the distance, faint but certain, like a heartbeat beneath layers of water and silence. And the heroes, now, part of that same rhythm, closed their eyes. The ocean, in return, held them. Night in the ocean is not darkness, but transformation. The deep does not sleep. It changes its light. What the sun abandons, the creatures themselves create. Threads of glow, beads of blue-green fire, slow drifting embers of living luminescence that paint the water in motion. Far beyond Bikini Bottom, where the seabed slopes into a valley of silt and shell, the lantern grounds awaken when the moonlight touches the surface. The lantern grounds had once been a meeting point for travelers of the deep, a gentle place where the currents carried seeds, spores, and stories alike. It was here, long ago, that the League had celebrated peace after storms, where, beneath veils of glowing plankton, they had sworn to guard the stillness between tides. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy moved toward that valley now. The current was slow and warm, carrying faint trails of light like whispers of starlight fallen into the sea. The journey was wordless, guided by rhythm rather than direction. The water seemed to know where they were going. As they descended, the first of the lanterns appeared, jellyfish suspended in the current, their translucent bodies pulsing with soft light. Each pulse sent a wave of illumination outward, brushing the sand, revealing the outlines of coral, shells, and the faint tracks of creatures moving through the night. The sea here glowed, as though it remembered every step ever taken upon it. The heroes drifted lower, through curtains of light. The glow brushed across their faces, soft and cool. For a moment, it seemed that they were moving through air rather than water, through clouds of living stars. When they reached the valley floor, the sight unfolded before them. Hundreds of lantern creatures, swaying in unison, anchored gently to the coral by long, silken tendrils. They filled the hollow like a slow-breathing garden, their light rising and falling in rhythm with the tide. Each glow had its own pulse, its own tempo, yet together they created harmony, a living constellation beneath the sea. The lantern grounds were silent, except for that soft rhythm, that invisible music of breath and motion. The heroes stood still, letting their own hearts fall into pace with it. In that moment, the water, the light, and their bodies became one continuous motion. Mermaid Man stepped forward, his hand brushing a tendril of light. The jellyfish responded not with retreat, but with deepening glow, its color shifting from pale blue to gold. Around it, others began to change as well, one by one, until the whole valley shone with gentle warmth. The water grew brighter, clearer. Barnacle Boy watched as small creatures, tiny shrimp and plankton, began to gather near the hero's feet, drawn by the glow. The sea itself seemed to recognize them, not as warriors or saviors, but as part of its long memory. The light reached upward, touching the undersides of clouds near the surface. For a moment, the ocean mirrored the sky perfectly. Stars above, lanterns below, and between them, the slow-moving shapes of two figures at peace. They stayed there for hours. There was no need to move, no reason to mark time. The world around them breathed in wide, even rhythm. The lanterns swayed, their tendrils drawing long arcs through the water. The heroes stood within that movement, still and steady, like stones in the heart of a river. At some unseen signal, the current began to shift. The lantern's glow softened, their rhythm slowing. The creatures began to drift upward, releasing their anchors from the coral. One by one, they rose toward the surface, until the valley was filled with ascending lights. It was a migration, an old pattern of the sea, older than memory. Each lantern rose gently, carrying with it a fragment of bioluminescent dust that shimmered in the wake of its departure. The two heroes watched as the lights ascended, hundreds of small orbs moving upward like a reversed snowfall. When the last of the lanterns had gone, the valley dimmed into quiet gray blue. Only faint traces of glow remained, floating like echoes where light had once been. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy began to move again, following the trail of rising brightness. They broke the surface near the reef, where moonlight lay across the waves in smooth ribbons. Around them, the lanterns floated just below the surface, their glow blending with the reflection of the stars. It was impossible to tell where ocean ended and sky began. The heroes drifted there, half submerged, eyes turned upward. The water rocked them gently, its rhythm slow and sure. They did not think of time or purpose. The sea was enough. Eventually, the current carried them back toward home. The lanterns followed for a while, their light moving in soft arcs along the ocean floor. Even as distance grew, the glow lingered, tracing faint paths through the dark. When they reached the dome, the lights outside the window still flickered faintly with the reflection of the lanterns far away. Inside, the coral fragment and the beacon shell glowed together, their steady light now joined by a third rhythm. The faint pulse of the lantern grounds carried home in the folds of the current. The heroes rested once more in their chairs. The dome's light dimmed as night deepened. The water pressed softly against the walls, its movement slow and comforting. The lanterns continued their silent journey across the sea, drifting wherever the current led, carrying the glow of the deep into every corner of the world. Some would settle near coral reefs, others would vanish into the open blue, and a few would dissolve entirely, their light becoming part of the water itself. Yet none were lost. Their glow joined the rhythm that had no end, the quiet song that held everything together. The heroes listened. In that low hum of the sea, they could almost hear it, the slow merging of past and present, of effort and rest, of memory and motion. The sound was not heroic, it was eternal. As they drifted toward sleep, the glow from the coral, the shell, and the unseen lanterns wove together into a single, soft light that filled the room. It was the same light that had always guided them, through storms, through silence, through time itself. And now, It needed no reason to shine. It simply was. The sea carries its songs in hidden places. They are not sung aloud, nor written upon the sand. They exist in the quiet spaces beneath the current, melodies made of vibration and memory, resonating through stone and coral, echoing endlessly in the water's body. Far from Bikini Bottom, beyond the lantern grounds and the coral citadel, the sea caves of the southern ridge stretched in a labyrinth of shadow and light. It was here, long before legends and names, that the first currents had carved their paths through the living rock. The water moved through those passages like breath through lungs, creating tones and whispers that wove together into an unending hymn. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy had not planned to come here. The sea itself had led them. The current that brushed through their home one quiet morning carried with it a resonance unlike any other, a low humming call that seemed to vibrate in their bones. It was not a summons of distress or danger. It was older, simpler, and deeper, an invitation to listen. They followed the current south, descending through the darkening blue, past forests of tall kelp swaying in slow unison, until the water grew cooler and the light thinned to a quiet silver. The first of the sea caves opened before them, its mouth wide and dark, framed by anemones whose tendrils moved like the edges of a dream. They entered. Inside, the water felt heavier. The sound of the ocean shifted from the clear rhythm of waves to something more profound, the deep resonance of the earth beneath the sea. The cave walls were smooth, shaped by time and current, each surface catching light from unseen sources that flickered faintly, like the breath of sleeping fireflies. As they swam deeper, the first tones reached them. They were not sounds as one might hear above the surface. They were felt more than heard, a vibration that moved through the body rather than around it. The rock itself was singing. Barnacle Boy placed a hand upon the wall, and the song traveled through him, a slow pulse of energy that rose and fell like a heartbeat. Mermaid Man did the same, and for a moment, their two rhythms aligned perfectly with the stones. The effect was calming, grounding, and vast. The cave opened into a chamber filled with columns of coral and stone, rising from the floor like pillars in a cathedral. Between them, ribbons of light drifted from cracks above, scattering into shimmering motes that danced in the water. The song was louder here, yet still wordless. It had no melody, no direction, only flow. They floated in the center of the chamber, eyes half closed, listening. The vibration seemed to fill every part of them, seeping into the spaces between thought and breath. It was then that the echoes began to shape themselves, not into words, but into impressions. Each pulse of sound carried memory. They could feel it. The movement of ancient currents, the rise of coral reefs, the birth of the sea's first lights. The cave was remembering itself aloud, and through that memory, it spoke to them. It told of storms that had come and passed, of heroes who had listened before them, of moments when the ocean had nearly fallen silent and then sung again. It told of cycles without beginning or end, of balance restored again and again through patience, not force. The two heroes floated motionless, their eyes closed now. They did not try to understand. They only received. The sea's song was not meant for logic or interpretation. It was meant to be felt, to settle quietly into the spirit like silt on the ocean floor. Time passed without meaning. The song continued, low and endless. At moments, the vibrations grew stronger, forming harmonies that resonated in the coral pillars, sending faint trails of bioluminescent dust, spiraling upward. The chamber seemed alive with slow, rhythmic motion, breathing, remembering, being. Eventually, the tone shifted. It grew softer, more distant. The current began to move again, curling gently toward an opening at the far side of the chamber. The heroes followed. The next cave was narrower, its walls lined with glowing crystals of calcite. The light within them flickered in time with the fading song, each crystal pulsing softly as they passed. The tunnel curved and twisted until it opened suddenly into a vast hollow space, a dome of rock so large that its far edges dissolved into darkness. At the center of this cavern rose a single spire of coral and stone, reaching almost to the ceiling. It was hollow at its heart, and through it flowed a constant stream of water that shimmered faintly as it passed. The sound it made was delicate yet endless, a single pure tone that filled the space with tranquility. Mermaid Man swam closer, resting a hand on the flowing water as it emerged from the spire. The current was warm here, touched by something unseen. Barnacle Boy joined him, his expression still and open. Together they hovered before the spire, feeling the vibration move through them once more. This was the heart of the sea's song, not a place of power or mystery, but of balance. The water flowed endlessly through the coral and back into the ocean, carrying with it the resonance of everything it touched. It was the memory of life in motion. The heroes stayed there a long time. Around them, the faint glow of the crystals shifted through shades of blue and green, the tones rising and falling in response to their presence. The sea was listening too. When they finally turned to leave, the current guided them outward with care. The path they followed was lined with soft light, the water moving easily beneath their hands. The song remained, fading gradually behind them until it became indistinguishable from the rhythm of their own breathing. They emerged once more into the open sea. The world outside seemed brighter, the light clearer. Though the sun was hidden beyond the waves, the water felt changed, not quieter, but fuller, as though the caves had breathed life into it anew. As they drifted homeward, the memory of the song lingered, vibrating faintly in their chests. It was not a tune they could hum, nor a sound they could describe. It existed somewhere between silence and motion, between self and sea. Back in their dome, the coral and the shell pulsed faintly in rhythm with that same unheard song. The water inside the home shimmered slightly, touched by an invisible resonance that had followed them from the caves. The heroes settled into rest once again, the sea breathing softly around them. The sound of the caves echoed faintly in the distance, its vibration spreading outward through the water, reaching reefs, trenches, and shores alike. And somewhere far beneath the waves, the spire continued to sing, its single tone merging with the ocean's eternal hum. A lullaby for all who listen, a promise that the sea would always remember its song. Time beneath the ocean does not march in straight lines. It drifts, curves, and folds upon itself, like the currents that shape the sand. Days and years flow together, indistinguishable, until the present becomes a gentle echo of what has already been, and what has been becomes a quiet rhythm beneath the waves. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy had learned this truth long ago, though they felt it more keenly now. The years had slowed them, softened their movements, and yet they had grown more attuned to the currents of memory and motion that surrounded them. Each day was not measured in hours, but in the subtle shifts of the sea, the rise and fall of tides, the light on the sand, the pulse of life within the coral. That morning, they rose together as always, the water around their home alive with faint traces of bioluminescence. The coral fragment and beacon shell rested side by side, their glow gentle but steady. Outside, the current moved softly, carrying with it hints of the lantern, grounds, and the song of the sea caves, reminders of journeys already taken. Mermaid Man rose first, extending a hand toward the cape that hung upon the wall. It had lost none of its quiet dignity, its folds soft with age. He touched it lightly, feeling the weight of countless missions, countless tides. Time, he realized, had not erased the hero within him. It had only transformed it, giving it depth rather than speed, calm rather than urgency. Barnacle Boy followed, adjusting the small items that always accompanied him. His gloves, the emblem on his chest, the memories carried in silence. Together, they left their dome, and entered the open ocean, moving slowly, guided by the currents. The sea carried them without effort, gentle and patient, as if aware that they needed no haste. They passed familiar landmarks, the coral towers, the outer reef, the faint shimmer of distant city lights. Each held fragments of memory, echoes of the past. They did not speak, for words were unnecessary. The water itself was language, telling them where they had been, what they had seen, who they had been, and who they had become. The drift of time carried them further than the city, past the lantern grounds where jellyfish still glimmered faintly in rhythm, and beyond the caves where the song lingered in the stone. Here, the currents slowed, and the water deepened to a rich indigo. The light filtered in narrow bands from above, tracing patterns on the ocean floor. It was in this stillness that the heroes felt time most keenly, not as loss nor as accumulation, but as flow. Each moment stretched into the next, each breath connected to the pulse of the sea. They realized that every motion, every choice, every ripple they had once made had become part of this flow, embedded within the ocean's memory. Mermaid Man paused, extending a hand toward a drifting cloud of plankton. The tiny creatures swirled around him in spirals, catching the light like particles of gold. He watched the way. They moved, carried by currents both seen and unseen. In their dance, he perceived the nature of the drift, that life continues, quietly and endlessly, even when no one is watching. Barnacle Boy, moving beside him, traced the contours of a nearby coral formation. The surface was smooth from centuries of water and touch. He thought of the countless hands that had passed here before, the countless fins and bodies that had touched this same coral. Time, he understood, was not measured by years alone, but by interaction, by the quiet accumulation of presence. They continued their journey, guided by instinct and current, until they reached a ridge overlooking a deep trench. The water here was darker. The light from above almost vanished. Yet within the shadows, life persisted. Small fish glowed faintly. Shells rested on ledges like sculptures, and the coral grew in unexpected shapes, weaving towers and arches that defied logic. Mermaid Man rested at the edge of the ridge, feeling the slow pull of the water beneath him. Barnacle Boy joined him, settling beside his friend. Together, they watched the trench, the dark pulse of the sea moving endlessly. It was a reminder that even in places untouched by their heroism, life continued. Time drifted, and the ocean embraced all of it equally. They did not speak. Their silence was a tribute to the continuity of the world, to the rhythm of the tides that had carried them through decades of adventure. In the quiet, they could feel the presence of those who had come before. The electric eel, the coral crusader, the siren of the shoals. All lives folded gently into the current, their actions now part of the larger song of the sea. A faint glimmer caught Mermaid Man's eye, and he followed it to the edge of the trench. There, resting on a ledge of stone, was a fragment of glowing crystal, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. He reached out, touching it lightly. The current shifted around him, carrying the energy of the crystal in spirals. And for a moment, he felt the drift of time as clearly as he had ever felt it, stretching backward into memory, forward into possibility, and resting always in the present moment. Barnacle Boy watched him, sensing the subtle resonance of the crystal. It was not magic, nor power in the sense they had once wielded. It was life itself, distilled into a single form, reminding them that the flow of time is not a thief, but a companion. Every moment they had experienced, every challenge they had faced, every quiet day of reflection was carried onward in the eternal current. They stayed at the ridge for a long time, drifting in place as the currents moved around them. The light from above shifted subtly, narrowing into slender bands as the sun descended, filtering through the water like liquid gold. The plankton swirled, the coral swayed, and the deep pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm that spoke without words. Eventually, The current guided them back toward home. They passed the familiar shapes of the citadel and the caves, each echoing faintly with the light and song of previous days. The lantern grounds shimmered faintly in the distance, a constellation of tiny living lights that reminded them of the beauty carried forward by time. Inside their dome, the coral and beacon shell glowed softly, synchronized with the rhythm of the current outside. The heroes settled into their chairs, the water pressing gently against the walls. The drift of time had followed them home, not as a burden, but as a quiet companion, its presence filling the space with continuity and calm. Mermaid Man closed his eyes. Barnacle Boy did the same. The glow of the shell and coral filled the room with a steady pulse, echoing the rhythm they had felt throughout the day. Time, they understood, is never lost. It flows like water, carrying all things along its path, shaping life and memory alike. And as they drifted toward sleep, the ocean outside continued its endless motion, carrying with it the echoes of all who had lived, all who had moved, and all who would yet follow in the drift of time. The sea holds secrets, not in words, but in currents. It whispers, softly, to those who pause and listen, not to warn nor to demand, but to share what it has seen. Its voice moves along coral and sand, in pulses that resonate through the water like a heartbeat. Far from the bustling center of Bikini Bottom, there lay a stretch of reef that few ever visited. Its colors were muted, the coral worn and weathered. Yet there was a life here unlike any other, quiet, deliberate, and ancient. The locals called it the Whispering Reef, though its voices were never loud. They were carried instead in vibrations, patterns of light, and currents that hummed faintly through the stone. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy approached the reef slowly, moving with the patience of those who had learned to feel the rhythm of the ocean. The water was soft, tinged with the last traces of daylight filtering down from above. They had been traveling for hours, not in search of action, but in search of understanding, a gentle communion with the world they had long protected. As they drifted closer, the reef seemed to recognize them. Tiny fish darted around their fins, weaving intricate patterns in the water. Anemones swayed, opening their delicate tendrils to brush lightly against the current. The very stones seemed alive, carrying faint vibrations that merged with the hero's own heartbeats. Mermaid Man reached out, brushing the coral gently. A ripple of light spread through it, faint but perceptible. The reef responded, not in words, not in sound, but in motion. Each pulse carried history. Echoes of storms survived, currents navigated, dangers averted, lives quietly saved. The reef was not speaking to them as heroes, but as witnesses. Barnacle Boy moved alongside him, letting his hand hover over a bed of soft coral. He could feel the subtle hum beneath his fingertips, a resonance that spoke of patience and endurance. Every living creature here carried memory. Even the smallest crustacean, hidden beneath a ledge, seemed part of a symphony composed over countless tides. They wandered deeper into the reef, following the currents that twisted and spiraled through its arches. Each turn revealed new patterns of light and shadow. Bioluminescent algae glimmered faintly, casting gentle halos over their path. Small fish flitted between the corals, like stars caught in the drift of the water. The heroes paused before a particularly large formation, an ancient coral tower, its surface covered in fine grooves from centuries of water movement. Mermaid Man pressed a hand to it, feeling the slow pulse beneath. The reef here seemed almost conscious, as if acknowledging their presence. For a long time, they simply floated in place, letting the whispers of the reef wash over them. Currents brushed gently against their fins, carrying with them fragments of memory. The first days of the League, the soft laughter of those who had come before, the quiet moments when heroism meant nothing more than presence, vigilance, and care. It was in that silence that they noticed movement in the shadows. Small creatures, shrimp, crabs, and schools of translucent fish emerged from hidden crevices. They moved slowly, circling the heroes, drawn to the calm they carried. The reef seemed to be revealing itself, showing not its grandeur, but its subtle, enduring life. Barnacle Boy extended a hand toward a passing school of tiny fish. They did not scatter, but glimmered faintly, as if reflecting some internal light. The heroes watched them drift along, carried by gentle currents, their movement perfectly synchronized. It was a lesson in harmony, an understanding that the world does not always require force, only alignment. Mermaid Man followed a faint trail of bubbles rising from a hidden crevice. They led to a small hollow within the reef, filled with delicate coral fans and tiny glowing organisms. The airless space pulsed with its own rhythm, quiet and steady. Here, the whisper of the sea was strongest, vibrating softly through the water and into their bodies. They lingered there until the currents began to shift, signaling the slow passage of time. Light above thinned, turning the reef into shades of deep blue and green. Shadows lengthened along the coral, and the bioluminescent glow of the organisms became more pronounced. It was as though the reef itself was breathing, inhaling and exhaling with measured calm. The heroes began to drift back, following the currents that led toward open water. The reef continued to hum softly around them, a resonance that carried beyond the boundaries of its coral walls. Every ripple, every shadow, every subtle flicker of light was a part of the story. A story written not in words, but in presence, patience, and attention. As they emerged into open water, the city lights of Bikini Bottom twinkled faintly in the distance. The currents carried the whispers of the reef along the way, brushing gently against their fins and dissolving into the broader rhythm of the ocean. The heroes were silent, not from necessity, but because silence was the appropriate response to such deep understanding. Inside their dome, the glow of the coral fragment and beacon shell had shifted subtly, as if carrying the resonance of the reef home with them. The light pulsed softly, blending into a single rhythm. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy settled into their chairs, letting the day's drift settle into their bones. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal motion, waves and currents interweaving into patterns both old and new. The reef's whispers extended outward, carried into the wider ocean, reaching hidden grottos, distant valleys, and quiet stretches of sand. They became part of the deep's endless song, a song of endurance, memory, and calm. And in that song, the heroes rested. They were no longer simply watchers or saviors. They were part of the current, part of the rhythm, part of the quiet understanding that all things move, all things endure, and all things are remembered. The whispering reef faded behind them in the gentle dark, its voice traveling onward, unhurried, eternal, and serene. Beneath the ocean, light does not always come from the sun. Some of the brightest illumination rises from the creatures themselves, from coral that glows faintly, and from minerals that shine like distant stars trapped in the water. The hidden depths hold their own radiance, subtle, constant, and quietly alive. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy swam through the deep that evening, moving toward a region long untouched by the currents of everyday life. It was a vast trench, dark and wide, yet threaded with faint pulses of luminescence. Here, the ocean whispered secrets older than the surface tides, and the heroes moved with the careful attention of those who knew how precious such places were. The water around them grew cooler, carrying the metallic tang of distant minerals. Soft currents swirled in patterns they could feel more than see, pulling them downward into the deeper folds of the ocean. Every movement was deliberate. Even a sudden turn would have disturbed the delicate balance of calm life in these depths. As they approached the first of the glow spires, small bioluminescent creatures began to appear, flickering faintly in the water like the slow blink of stars. Tiny squids drifted upward, their tentacles tipped with sparks of light. Jellyfish swayed with a soft rhythm, their pulses synchronizing with the subtle beat of the ocean. The deeper they went, the more numerous these living lights became, forming a vast, slow constellation that stretched into the distance. Mermaid Man reached toward one of the larger glowing corals, his hand brushing the soft surface. The coral's glow intensified slightly, casting a gentle circle of illumination across the water. Barnacle Boy followed, placing his hand against a stone encrusted with glowing algae. The combination of coral, algae, and living creatures created a symphony of soft radiance, a light born not of flame, but of life itself. They drifted slowly through this hidden world, allowing the glow to guide them. Shadows formed and dissolved as they passed, revealing intricate patterns on the sand below, ridges carved by long-ago currents, shells half buried, and tiny fish weaving through the columns of light. Each movement, each flicker, contributed to the ongoing story of this place, a story written in presence, patience, and quiet endurance. The trench widened, revealing a cavern formed of stone and coral. Within it, the glow was brightest, a gentle brilliance that illuminated everything without harshness. The water was thick with suspended particles, tiny motes that caught the light and created the impression of stars floating within the ocean itself. Mermaid Man swam to the center of the cavern, letting the light wash over him. It was soothing, almost tangible, the kind of illumination that reaches deep into the mind and calms thoughts before they can even form. Barnacle Boy settled nearby, his body swaying gently with the subtle currents, eyes tracing the dance of the glowing creatures. Here, the sea was not simply alive, it was reflective. The glow illuminated not just the water and coral, but the memory of life itself. Each flicker seemed to carry fragments of past motion, echoes of the hero's own adventures, long-forgotten rescues, and the countless small choices that had shaped their journey. The ocean remembered. They drifted through the cavern, moving from one glow spire to another, feeling the gentle pull of currents and light. Even the tiniest creatures seemed aware of them, pausing their movement to pass in harmony with the hero's slow swim. The rhythm was not enforced, it was natural, as if the presence of the two figures resonated with the steady pulse of the depths. Mermaid Man paused before a particularly tall coral formation, taller than either of them. Its surface was encrusted with phosphorescent algae and tiny glowing polyps. He placed a hand upon it, feeling the warmth of life and the steady thrum of the water. A faint vibration traveled through him, echoing across every nerve, every fiber, a subtle reminder that even in the darkest depths, life shines quietly. Barnacle Boy followed, resting his hand on a nearby spire of stone. The glow pulsed slightly, as if acknowledging their presence. Around them, the water seemed to hum softly, carrying the resonance of all things alive in these hidden depths. The entire cavern felt aware, though not sentient, simply present, a testament to time, endurance, and the quiet brilliance of the ocean. They lingered there for hours, drifting among the spires and watching the interplay of light and shadow. Occasionally, a larger creature would pass, a gentle whale or a slow-moving manta ray, and the glow would ripple in response, illuminating the heroes briefly before fading again. Every element of this hidden world seemed to move in harmony, connected in a rhythm that had existed for countless tides. Eventually, the current began to guide them outward, toward shallower water. The glow faded gradually, becoming less concentrated but spreading across a wider area. The heroes drifted with it, carrying the sensation of the hidden brilliance with them. They did not speak, for words would have been insufficient. The light itself told the story of life persisting quietly, steadfastly, in places unseen. As they ascended toward the surface near the edge of Bikini Bottom, the first hints of moonlight touched the water. It mingled with the fading glow from the depths, creating a layered brilliance of silver and phosphorescent light. The city below twinkled faintly, small lights echoing the quiet constellations they had left behind in the trench. Inside their dome, the coral fragment and beacon shell pulsed gently, a soft reminder of the ocean's rhythm and brilliance. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy settled into their chairs, the memory of hidden depths glowing softly within them. Outside, the water carried the residual glow outward, merging with the currents and touching every corner of the ocean, unseen, yet ever present. And in that moment, the two heroes understood once more that the sea's brilliance is never lost. It drifts, spreads, and endures quietly in the deepest places, in the smallest creatures, and in the silent rhythm of currents that carry the memory of life onward. The ocean outside hummed with light and movement. The heroes closed their eyes, embraced by the steady pulse of the hidden depths, a gentle lullaby for those who had listened long enough to understand. The sea does not simply move, it reflects. Not in mirrors or glass, but in currents, in light bending through water, in the way each wave carries not just itself, but the memory of everything it has passed. Reflections beneath the ocean are not mere images. They are impressions, echoes of life and time, of actions and choices, of moments that have left ripples in the tide. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy had learned to notice these reflections in the quiet hours. They had drifted past glowing depths, whispered reefs, and caverns alive with song. Now, as the currents carried them gently beyond the familiar boundaries of Bikini Bottom, they found themselves in a region of water that seemed to pause, not moving, yet flowing with subtle motion beneath the surface. Here, the reflection was everywhere. The sand shifted in delicate patterns, mirroring currents from distant regions. Tiny fish shimmered faintly, their scales catching light in a way that traced the arcs of their paths. Even the water itself seemed to shimmer with layered echoes, capturing fragments of the hero's movements and replaying them gently, like waves of memory. Mermaid Man floated quietly, letting the current carry him while his eyes followed the subtle reflections around him. He saw a faint trail of light that arced along a ridge of coral, a pattern that had been left by a passing school of jellyfish minutes ago, now frozen and replaying slowly in the water. Each pulse of the jellyfish's glow echoed across the surfaces of nearby stones, creating a delicate mosaic of light and shadow. Barnacle Boy moved alongside him, tracing a similar pattern with his hand. The water responded to their touch, currents shifting softly to enhance the reflections. It was not control, not command, merely participation in the ongoing rhythm of the sea. Every gesture left a mark, however subtle, and the ocean remembered it, replaying it gently in patterns of motion and light. The heroes drifted deeper, toward a trench lined with smooth stones and coral spires. Here, the reflections became more vivid, more intricate. Streams of bioluminescent plankton formed delicate threads that wove through the water, tracing paths that had been taken by larger creatures hours ago. The entire space was alive with echoes of movement, like a silent symphony performed in light and water. Mermaid Man extended a hand toward one of the streams, letting the plankton swirl around his fingers. He felt the vibration of the water beneath him, the pulse of life carried in every minuscule motion. The reflections here were not static. They flowed, interacted, and evolved, creating a tapestry of memory that shifted subtly with the currents. Barnacle Boy reached toward a nearby coral arch, running a finger along its surface. The water shimmered in response, revealing tiny cracks and ridges that captured reflections from distant currents. It was as if the ocean itself were reminding them that every act, however small, leaves an imprint, one that may be invisible to the eye but preserved in the rhythm of the sea. They floated together in silence, allowing the currents to move around them. The reflections were layered, past and present merging seamlessly. The ghosts of adventures past drifted through the water alongside living creatures. The memory of every rescue, every moment of quiet vigilance, every decision to act or refrain from action, wove itself into the ever-shifting tapestry of light. A faint shadow moved along the ridge of coral. A solitary manta ray glided past, its broad wings reflecting streams of light left behind by the plankton. The reflection danced across the floor of the trench, magnifying the subtle beauty of the moment. The heroes watched, still and steady, absorbing the quiet rhythm of observation and reflection. Time here did not exist in hours or minutes. It existed in layers, overlapping and intertwining, stretching forward and backward in endless waves. The ocean reflected not only light but intent, presence, and memory. Every gesture, every movement, every ripple in the tide carried meaning, recorded in the gentle hum of the sea. Mermaid Man paused before a small hollow in the coral, where faint glows from phosphorescent algae and tiny creatures blended into a single soft illumination. He pressed a hand against the wall, feeling the vibrations of life, history, and memory all at once. Barnacle Boy joined him, resting his hand beside his companion's. The reflections here were most vivid, showing not just motion but the subtle interplay of energy, the faint traces of effort, care, and attention that had shaped this region for countless tides. They stayed there for hours, drifting in the currents, watching the layers of reflection unfold. Each moment felt complete, yet part of an endless continuum. The sea had no beginning, no end. It preserved everything, not in permanence, but in perpetual motion. The reflections were both ephemeral and eternal, a silent record of life's continuous flow. Eventually, the current carried them toward open water. The glow of the plankton faded, the shadows softened, and the reflections thinned into faint ripples that merged with the wider rhythm of the ocean. The heroes drifted onward, leaving the trench behind, yet carrying the memory of its reflective beauty within them. Near the edge of Bikini Bottom, the city lights shimmered faintly through the water, echoing the patterns of reflection they had observed in the trench. The coral fragment and beacon shell pulsed gently inside their dome, their soft glow harmonizing with the rhythm of the currents outside. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy settled into their chairs, letting the gentle reflection of the ocean wash through them. In that quiet moment, the heroes understood once more that reflection is not merely seeing, it is feeling, absorbing, and participating. The ocean's memory is layered, intricate, and constant. It carries every gesture, every choice, and every act of care within its currents, preserving them not as trophies or relics, but as living, flowing testimony. The water outside continued its steady motion, waves and currents interweaving into patterns both visible and invisible. The heroes rested in that rhythm, embraced by the gentle, endless reflections of the sea, knowing that every ripple, every current, every glow of light was part of a greater, ongoing story. And as they drifted into quiet sleep, the currents carried the reflections forward, weaving together past, present, and future in the unbroken flow of the ocean's eternal embrace. The ocean breathes, not as humans do, with lungs expanding and contracting, but in vast rhythms that span miles, that rise and fall with currents, tides, and the unseen pulse of life beneath the surface. The deep inhales slowly, drawing water through trenches and crevices, and exhales gently, sending motion outward to every corner of the sea. It is a breath older than memory, steady and unbroken, and those who pause can feel its presence deep in the bones. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy felt it as soon as they left their dome that morning. The current carried the subtle rhythm of the deep, a slow pulse that seemed to emanate from far below the ocean floor. The water was cooler here, filled with the quiet scent of distant minerals and the faint hum of life beyond sight. They swam without urgency, letting the breath of the ocean guide them. The world above, bright and busy, receded into shadow. Below, the currents twisted in gentle spirals, moving sand and plankton in patterns so subtle that only those who truly listened could perceive them. The heroes passed through a narrow canyon of stone and coral, its walls smooth and worn by centuries of water. Each surface seemed to vibrate slightly, carrying the resonance of the ocean's pulse. Barnacle Boy reached out, touching the stone lightly. The vibration traveled through him, filling his limbs with a slow, steady energy. Mermaid Man followed, placing his hand alongside, and together they felt the deep's breath as a living rhythm beneath their skin. It was in this quiet that the heroes understood the vastness of the ocean's patience. The breath of the deep moves not for haste, not for urgency, but for continuity. It carries not only water, but memory, the weight of all life, all movement, and all care that has ever passed through its currents. The inhale and exhale of the ocean connects the distant trenches to the shallows, the reefs to the abyss, and the past to the present. As they descended further, the light above faded, leaving them in a twilight of muted colors. Bioluminescent organisms began to appear, scattered like faint stars across the darkened water. Tiny fish glimmered as they passed, and coral spires emitted subtle pulses, all in harmony with the rhythm of the deep. Mermaid Man paused at a cavern entrance, letting the water carry him gently inward. The chamber inside was vast, stretching into darkness beyond the reach of any light. Yet within it, the ocean's breath was palpable, a slow, rolling swell that moved through the space, shifting sand and stirring currents in a gentle, endless motion. Barnacle Boy joined him, settling near the center of the chamber. Here, the pulse of the deep was strongest. It moved not only through water, but through stone and coral, carrying the subtle vibration of life itself. The heroes closed their eyes, letting their bodies become part of the rhythm. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes and hours lost distinction as the inhale and exhale of the cries. Ocean filled every moment. The heroes felt themselves both present and suspended, carried on a tide older than any memory, yet immediate in its embrace. The cavern was alive with subtle light. Bioluminescent algae clung to the walls, glowing faintly in response to the motion of the water. Small creatures moved in slow, deliberate paths, their motions synchronized with the rhythm of the deep. Even the sand seemed to flow gently, rising and falling with each exhalation, settling again with each inhalation. Mermaid Man extended a hand to a tall coral spire, feeling the pulse of life within it. The coral's glow responded to his touch, brightening faintly and then fading back into rhythm with the cavern. Barnacle Boy did the same, with a smooth stone nearby. Together, they traced the subtle currents of the ocean's breath, allowing themselves to be guided by it rather than guiding in return. The deep's rhythm carried memory as well as motion. They could feel echoes of past journeys, fragments of storms weathered, rescues undertaken, and quiet days spent in vigilance. These memories were not intrusive. They were threads woven into the current, reminders that every action, however small, contributes to the enduring flow of life. After a long while, the current shifted, drawing them deeper into the cavern. A soft luminescence from the walls illuminated their path, revealing hidden passages and coral formations they had not noticed before. Tiny creatures followed them, moving in arcs that mirrored the inhalation and exhalation of the deep. The heroes did not speak. Their silence was part of the rhythm, an acknowledgement of the vastness surrounding them. Eventually, the chamber narrowed, and the current guided them upward toward shallower water. The glow of the bioluminescent creatures faded gradually, replaced by the softer, silvery light filtering from above. As they ascended, they could feel the ocean's breath moving outward, spreading across the deep and touching distant reefs, valleys, and grottos. Near the edge of Bikini Bottom, the familiar city lights shimmered faintly, echoing the pulse of the deep they had just experienced. The coral fragment and beacon shell inside their dome pulsed gently in time with the rhythm of the currents outside, a quiet reflection of the deep's enduring presence. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy settled into their chairs, letting the rhythm of the ocean fill them completely. The inhale and exhale of the deep, carried across miles of water, reminded them that life continues, preserved not in urgency, but in steady, patient motion. The ocean does not rush, it endures. It carries memory, care, and continuity in every pulse. Outside, the currents continued their slow, unbroken journey. The ocean breathed endlessly, inhaling the distant past and exhaling the present into the wide, living water. The heroes rested, held within that eternal rhythm, part of the ocean's slow, infinite exhalation. And as they drifted toward sleep, they carried with them the lesson of the deep, that life's true power lies not in haste or noise, but in the quiet persistence of care, attention, and enduring presence. The ocean breathed on, and they breathed with it. The ocean wears many veils. Some are made of shadow, some of light, some of the subtle shimmer that bends around currents and reflects through water like threads of silver. Among these veils, the world beneath the waves shifts constantly, revealing some things while concealing others, offering glimpses of wonder to those who move slowly enough to notice. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy approached one such veil that morning. It lay just beyond a ridge of coral and sand, a region where the current shifted gently, carrying fragments of light from above in delicate layers. Each wave of water folded over the next, creating a subtle, continuous shimmer that seemed alive. A flowing curtain suspended in motion. They drifted closer, allowing the veil to part naturally with their passage. The shimmer was not static. It shifted and danced, responding to the currents and to the movement of creatures unseen. Tiny particles caught the light, forming fleeting arcs and patterns, each one unique, yet all part of the same quiet rhythm. Mermaid Man extended a hand, touching the edge of the flowing shimmer. It rippled against him, soft and fluid, tracing patterns across his skin. Barnacle Boy mirrored the gesture, letting the veil of currents wrap around him gently. In that touch, they felt the pulse of the ocean as never before. The shimmer carried not just motion, but memory, echoing every ripple that had passed through this stretch of water. The veil revealed glimpses of hidden life. Tiny fish darted in and out, their scales catching faint traces of light. Coral spires bent gently in the current, their tips glowing faintly with bioluminescent patterns. Small creatures scuttled across the sand below, moving in delicate synchrony with the shimmering water above. Everything existed in layers of motion, light, and subtle communication, a symphony composed entirely of presence. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy floated slowly through the curtain, letting it drift around them. It was like moving through a dream, soft and enveloping. The veil seemed to respond to their presence, parting to reveal hidden passages and arches of coral, then folding back into gentle waves of shimmer behind them. The deeper they went, the more intricate the patterns became. The shimmer carried the echo of currents from distant regions of the ocean, folding in movements of creatures too small or too hidden to be seen. Each ripple contained fragments of light and motion that told the story of the ocean's quiet life, the ongoing interplay of energy, presence, and attention that had existed for centuries. Barnacle Boy traced a finger along a band of light that coiled like a ribbon in the current. The shimmer responded to his touch, thickening and brightening for a moment, before spreading out again in delicate waves. Mermaid Man moved alongside him, observing how the veil's rhythm connected with the subtle currents around them, merging into a single, seamless motion. They passed through the arch of coral where the veil split into multiple threads, each flowing independently, yet harmonizing with the others. Tiny, glowing creatures swirled along these threads, their motion choreographed by the currents themselves. The heroes moved slowly, not to lead, not to direct, but simply to follow, allowing themselves to be part of the unfolding pattern. At the center of the veil, the water deepened, and the shimmer became more concentrated. Here, the layers of motion, light, and memory intersected most vividly. Bioluminescent algae glowed in soft arcs, tiny plankton traced the paths of previous currents, and small fish swirled in delicate synchrony. The entire space seemed aware, not conscious, but alive in a way that could be felt through the rhythm of the currents. Mermaid Man extended a hand toward a cluster of glowing coral. The shimmer from the veil wrapped around his fingers, amplifying the glow and spreading it gently through the surrounding water. Barnacle Boy followed, resting his hand on a smooth spire nearby. Together, They became part of the interplay, not as controllers, but as participants in the ocean's quiet design. Time in this place lost its usual meaning. Minutes and hours folded into each other, measured only by the slow drift of currents and the rise and fall of light. The veil of shimmering currents carried both past and present, a living record of motion that stretched across centuries. The heroes could feel fragments of history, the echoes of storms weathered, the movement of creatures long gone, the memory of tides that had shifted countless sands. Eventually, the veil guided them toward open water once more. The shimmer thinned gradually, its threads dispersing into the wider ocean. The heroes drifted outward, carrying with them the quiet resonance of the currents, their bodies attuned to the rhythm of light and motion. As they reached the shallows near Bikini Bottom, the city lights shimmered faintly through the water, echoing the patterns they had observed within the veil. The coral fragment and beacon shell inside their dome pulsed softly, synchronized with the gentle rhythm of the ocean outside. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy settled into their chairs, letting the shimmer of the currents fill their awareness completely. The veil of shimmering currents had revealed its lesson, that the ocean is always alive with subtle motion, that every ripple, every thread of light, and every quiet pulse carries memory and meaning. The heroes understood that their presence, too, left traces, not in noise or spectacle, but in gentle, persistent participation. Outside, the currents continued their endless flow, light folded into water, water into light, and the rhythm of the ocean carried the shimmer forward into hidden valleys, quiet grottos, and distant reefs. The veil had parted for them, offered its quiet beauty, and would continue to move through the sea long after they had returned home. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy closed their eyes, enveloped in the soft pulse of the ocean's endless shimmer. The currents carried them gently, their bodies and minds aligned with the rhythm of the deep, a reflection of the enduring, patient life of the sea. And in that stillness, the ocean whispered once more, carrying the shimmer forward, unbroken, eternal, and serene. The abyss is not empty. It is filled with whispers, subtle vibrations, and a presence so profound that it does not speak in words, yet communicates in the language of time, pressure, and flow. Down there, in the depths beyond light, the ocean gathers its memories and holds them in quiet chorus. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy approached the edge of the abyss with measured care. The water above shimmered faintly with bioluminescent life, but below, darkness stretched without end. It was not frightening. Rather, it carried a deep, resonant calm, a weightless permanence that spoke of the ocean's ancient patience. As they descended, the temperature dropped, the water growing dense and slow-moving. The light from above receded, replaced by faint, ethereal glows of creatures adapted to eternal darkness. Tiny orbs of phosphorescence dotted the water, pulsating in soft, irregular rhythms, like 1,000 slow heartbeats woven together. The heroes entered a vast trench where the walls of stone and coral rose, like cathedral pillars, cloaked in shadow. The pressure pressed gently against them, a constant reminder of the abyss's vast scale. Yet the current carried them with ease, guiding their movement, and in that guidance, they felt the abyss breathing around them. It was there, in the quiet of the deep, that they sensed the silent choir. Not a choir in the conventional sense, but a layering of vibrations, motions, and light patterns that formed a subtle, ongoing resonance. The abyss itself seemed to hum, a low, continuous song that was less sound and more feeling, a symphony woven from pressure, currents, and bioluminescent rhythm. Mermaid Man extended a hand toward a floating column of coral encrusted with luminous algae. The glow responded, brightening faintly, as though acknowledging his presence. Barnacle Boy rested his hand on a smooth stone nearby, feeling the faint vibration that ran through the cavern floor. Together, they became part of the choir, merging their own rhythm with that of the abyss. The song of the silent choir carried memory as well as motion. Every pulse seemed to hold the weight of centuries, of tides rising and falling, of creatures born and passing. The heroes felt fragments of the past, schools of fish navigating ancient currents, storms bending coral into new shapes, long-forgotten travelers carried by the ocean's patient hand. It was a reminder that even in places untouched by the bustling life above, time leaves its traces. They drifted further into the trench, letting the choir guide their movement. Streams of plankton traced invisible paths, their luminescence painting slow arcs of light. Jellyfish floated in gentle clusters, their bells pulsing in time with the abyss's subtle rhythm. Even the sand, rising and falling in microcurrents, participated, forming delicate patterns that echoed across the cavern floor. Mermaid Man closed his eyes, feeling the full presence of the choir in his body. The vibrations moved through him like a slow, deliberate pulse, steady and constant. Barnacle Boy mirrored the motion, letting the rhythm penetrate his consciousness. In that silence, in that gentle weight of being carried by the deep, they felt the continuity of the ocean itself. The choir was not static. Layers of light, pressure, and motion shifted and intertwined, creating evolving patterns. At times, the chorus seemed to swell, responding to subtle changes in current or the movement of a creature. At others, it softened, receding into gentle pulses that reminded the heroes of the ocean's patience, of its slow, unbroken endurance. They followed a narrow passage that led deeper into the trench. The walls of stone rose high, covered in glowing algae and tiny coral polyps. Light from bioluminescent creatures shimmered along the surfaces, reflecting in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost musical. The entire trench became a cathedral of soft illumination and resonant motion. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy lingered near a particularly tall spire, letting the choir envelop them completely. Each pulse seemed to carry both sound and memory, a merging of existence and motion. The abyss was teaching them, reminding them that heroism is not always loud or celebrated. It is often quiet, patient, and enduring, like the rhythm of the deep itself. Eventually, the current guided them upward, toward regions where the faint light of the surface began to return. The choir did not vanish. It persisted, layered into every current, every pulse, and every fragment of bioluminescent life they passed. Even as the darkness receded, the memory of the abyss remained, a quiet, unbroken presence in the back of their minds. As they drifted back toward Bikini Bottom, the city lights shimmered faintly through the water. The coral fragment and beacon shell pulsed softly inside their dome, harmonizing with the rhythm of the ocean they had just experienced. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy settled into their chairs, letting the subtle resonance of the silent choir sink into their awareness. The abyss had revealed its lesson, that even in places unseen, unheard, or untouched, life persists, memory endures, and the rhythms of the ocean continue. Presence matters, even when it is silent. Care matters, even when unnoticed. Every ripple, every pulse, every glow contributes to the ongoing symphony of the deep. Outside, the currents continued their slow, endless flow. Light and shadow, pressure and motion, memory and being merged into the unbroken rhythm of the ocean. The silent choir continued, a testament to the patience, persistence, and quiet power of life in the depths. And the heroes rested, carried gently in the embrace of the deep, part of the chorus, and witnesses to its unceasing song. Somewhere beneath the waves, beyond the reefs, trenches, and hidden grottos, the ocean flows in a current older than memory itself. It moves without pause, carrying water, life, and history alike. This current is eternal, invisible to most, yet felt by every creature that drifts within its embrace. It does not hurry. It does not demand. It simply carries everything forward, patiently, endlessly, persistently. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy felt its pull before they saw it. The water seemed lighter here, smoother, as though the current had cleared a path through the deep. It was subtle, gentle, yet unmistakable, a rhythm woven into the ocean itself, resonating quietly in every pulse of movement. They followed it instinctively, guided not by sight, but by the feeling of motion beneath their fins. The current was vast, stretching far beyond any reef or trench, carrying water rich with the memory of distant storms and the shimmer of unseen bioluminescent creatures. It wound around stone and coral, twisting and spiraling in slow, deliberate loops. The heroes moved with it, their bodies attuned to its rhythm, not pushing against it, not resisting, merely becoming part of its flow. As they drifted, the ocean revealed its layers. Tiny fish flitted through the current, their scales reflecting fragments of light from above. Jellyfish pulsed faintly, synchronized with the larger rhythm of the water. Even the sand moved gently, swept along by the slow, persistent pull of the current, forming subtle ridges and arcs that recorded the passage of time in the language of motion. Mermaid Man reached toward a drifting column of glowing algae, letting the current carry it past his hand. Barnacle Boy mirrored the motion, feeling the gentle tug of water guiding them both. The eternal current was not a force to be commanded. It was a companion, patient and steady, carrying them through spaces both known and unknown. They drifted deeper, into a canyon formed of smooth stone and ancient coral. Here, the current narrowed, twisting and spiraling with greater intensity, yet retaining its quiet, patient energy. The walls of the canyon were dotted with faintly glowing polyps, casting a soft, luminescent pattern on the water. Tiny creatures moved in perfect unison, riding the flow as naturally as the heroes themselves. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy paused briefly to observe. The current here felt like a thread connecting everything: the distant reefs, the hidden depths, the whispering caves they had visited, and even the shallow waters near Bikini Bottom. It was as if all parts of the ocean were drawn together in this single eternal flow, moving in quiet, unbroken continuity. The heroes followed the current further into the deep, where the water thickened with the pulse of life. Schools of fish streamed past like living ribbons, drifting effortlessly along the rhythm of the current. Bioluminescent plankton shimmered in trails behind them, tracing paths that had been created hours or even days before. Every movement, every motion, became part of the ongoing record of the ocean's life. Mermaid Man extended a hand toward a column of coral glowing faintly with its own light. The current wrapped around it gently, illuminating the coral's intricate textures and patterns. Barnacle Boy rested on a nearby stone, feeling the faint vibration of the water moving over the surface. Together, they became part of the current, their presence seamlessly woven into the endless flow. Time here did not exist in the usual sense. There were no minutes, no hours, no days, only the eternal pull of the current, carrying all things forward. The ocean does not measure, it preserves. Every ripple, every glimmer of light, every pulse of motion contributes to the continuum of life. The heroes felt this truth as they drifted, unhurried, fully immersed in the rhythm of the deep. After a long while, the current began to rise towards shallower water. The faint light from the surface returned, filtering in gentle silver bands that danced across the stone and coral. The glow from the plankton dimmed slightly, blending with the soft illumination from above. The eternal current continued to move, patient, steady, unbroken. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy allowed themselves to drift, carried gently back toward the fringes of Bikini Bottom. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance, echoing the eternal rhythm they had felt in the deep. Even the coral fragment and beacon shell inside their dome pulsed in quiet resonance with the current, reflecting the ocean's unbroken flow. They settled into their chairs, letting the feeling of the eternal current wash over them completely. It was a rhythm that required no effort, no urgency, only presence, attention, and the quiet understanding that life persists in every motion, every breath of water, every gentle pulse of existence. The ocean outside continued its patient journey, carrying currents, light, life, and memory in unbroken continuity. The heroes rested, enveloped in the rhythm, their bodies and minds aligned with the enduring flow of the sea. The eternal current would continue long after they slept, long after any individual presence, carrying the pulse of life across the depths in quiet, infinite motion. And in that enduring rhythm, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy found a deep serenity, a reminder that heroism is not always visible or celebrated. Sometimes, it is simply being present, being patient, and moving with the flow of life itself. The ocean breathed, carried, and persisted. The heroes rested within it, held by the eternal current, a quiet testament to the unbroken, patient, and gentle force of the sea. There comes a moment when the sea does not simply move or breathe. It embraces. It holds all that exists within its depths, all that has ever drifted through its currents, all that has been born and will be carried onward. This embrace is not forceful nor urgent. It is gentle, patient, and infinite, encompassing both the vast and the minute, the visible and the hidden, the fleeting and the eternal. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy experienced this embrace as they drifted beyond the familiar limits of Bikini Bottom, beyond the reefs and whispering grottos, beyond the shimmering veils of currents and the hidden depths they had explored. The water around them was calm, yet alive with subtle pulses. Light filtered faintly from above, mixing with bioluminescent glimmers from unseen creatures. Every motion, every ripple, resonated with a quiet harmony that spoke directly to the heart. The heroes moved slowly, letting the currents carry them without resistance. They were no longer racing, no longer pursuing urgency or drama. They were participants, witnesses, and companions in the ocean's eternal rhythm. The water shifted around them, brushing gently against fins and hands, carrying subtle scents of minerals, plankton, and distant reefs. Every pulse of motion felt deliberate, yet effortless, a seamless extension of the vast ocean itself. Mermaid Man extended a hand to a passing cloud of plankton. It swirled and danced around him in delicate spirals, shimmering faintly in the soft light. Barnacle Boy mirrored the gesture, watching the creatures drift in harmony with the currents. The plankton were small, fragile, and yet full of purpose. In their quiet motion, the heroes understood a profound truth. The ocean's embrace carries even the smallest of lives, honoring every movement, every moment, every presence. They drifted through an arch of coral shaped by centuries of tides, where light and shadow interwove in ever-changing patterns. Tiny fish darted in and out of crevices, their scales reflecting faint illumination like scattered jewels. Jellyfish floated gracefully, their soft pulses keeping time with the subtle rhythm of the currents. Even the sand beneath them seemed to breathe, rising and falling with the ocean's gentle, steady movement. Mermaid Man paused before a large spire of coral, brushing his fingers along its smooth surface. The bioluminescent tips pulsed slightly in response, and a slow, vibrating current flowed through the stone and into the surrounding water. Barnacle Boy placed his hand beside his companion's, feeling the same pulse. Together, they became one with the motion, a single note in the ocean's ongoing symphony. The embrace of the sea was everywhere. It carried the memory of distant storms, the motion of countless schools of fish, the gentle touch of tides over coral. It cradled creatures both seen and unseen, every moment of life preserved in currents that stretched across miles. The heroes felt it not as force, but as presence, a quiet, unwavering acknowledgement of all that had been and all that would continue. The water began to shift gently, guiding them upward toward the shallower edges of the ocean. The bioluminescent glow faded gradually, blending with the soft silver of moonlight filtering through the surface. Streams of plankton rose with the current, drifting along invisible paths, their motion synchronized with the eternal pulse of the water. As they approached the shallows, the familiar lights of Bikini Bottom shimmered faintly below. The city itself seemed to participate in the ocean's embrace, its structures reflecting the calm, quiet radiance of the water. The coral fragment and beacon shell inside their dome pulsed softly, echoing the rhythm of the currents outside. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy settled into their chairs, letting the gentle motion wash over them completely. In this final moment, they understood that heroism is not always marked by grand feats or loud victories. Sometimes, it is the quiet presence, the patient attention, the alignment with the rhythms of life itself, to move with care, to honor the flow of the world, to exist in harmony with the pulse of the ocean. This, too, is heroism, and it is eternal. The water around them carried the echoes of all they had witnessed. The drifting reefs, the shimmering currents, the hidden depths, and the silent choir of the abyss. Each ripple, each glow, each vibration became part of the ocean's embrace, a gentle yet unbreakable thread connecting the past, present, and future. Mermaid Man closed his eyes, resting fully in the rhythm of the sea. Barnacle Boy did the same, letting the gentle pulses guide him into a quiet state of peace. Together, they floated in the embrace of the ocean, knowing that they were neither alone nor separate from the vast living world around them. Outside, the currents moved endlessly, carrying life, light, and memory. Waves rose and fell, currents twisted and spiraled, and the soft glimmers of distant creatures shone faintly in the water. The ocean embraced all of it, the heroes, the small creatures, the reefs, and even the faintest traces of light from above. Its rhythm was constant, patient, and infinitely gentle. And so, in the calm and profound stillness of the ocean's eternal movement, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy rested. The water around them was alive with the quiet pulse of life, carrying them, cradling them, and joining them to the endless, unbroken flow of the sea. In the embrace of the ocean, there was serenity. There was presence. There was the quiet understanding that all things continue, all things endure, and all life, great or small, is held and carried forward by the gentle, eternal pulse of the deep. And as they drifted in this timeless lullaby, the ocean whispered its final comforting truth. All is remembered, all is carried, all is embraced.